Welcome back. President Trump arriving in Saudi Arabia this morning for the first foreign trip of his second term. The president was met by Prince Mohammed bin Salman this morning and will speak at the U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum later today. It's all ahead of his visit to Qatar and the United Arab Emirates this week, and the president was greeted with an almost royal welcome. Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst and chairman for the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane. General, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, great to see you, Maria. Thank you.
Especially since you and I were together in Riyadh back in 2017 when we met with MBS. I interviewed the Crown Prince on stage in Riyadh at that time, and there was lots of optimism about what Saudi Arabia was doing. Brett showed us a little of it last night on Special Report and how they've really changed things and in fact, modernized a bit. What do you think is possible now that President Trump has chosen Saudi Arabia for his first foreign trip? What is possible between the U.S. and the Saudis?
Yeah, well, it's pretty significant. I mean, his first foreign trip in the first administration in the summer of 2017, as you mentioned, was Saudi Arabia. And that surprised a lot of people. And here we are in the second administration, and it's Saudi Arabia again. I think what's really happening here is it's something of a reaction to the Biden administration, because when Biden came in, he immediately appeased Iran, cut back on the Trump sanctions, went into negotiations over the nuclear deal once again, and stiffed the Arabs. There were foreign military sales that were supposed to go to UAE and Saudi Arabia, and he held them up. And the Arabs said, what is going on here? We have a major change in policy from the Trump administration that moved closer to them and helped to normalize relationships with Israel, to the Biden administration that was stiffing them. And as a result of that, they have options. And one of those options was China, to bring China closer economically and also geopolitically, because they are very concerned about their own security dealing with Iran and their own economic viability. So Trump is back on the scene again, and his first visit is into Saudi Arabia. Primarily, this visit is about strengthening the economic relationship, and obviously comes with that will be the geopolitical relationship will be strengthened as well. And he brought with him, as you know, Maria, a contingent of American CEOs to meet the Crown Prince. And what he is seeking is major investment by Saudi Arabia, by the UAE, the next country, and Qatar in the United States. Half the capital of the world, as we know, is already invested in the United States, and President Trump wants more of it. And he thinks our technology, our innovation, our ability to execute much better than any other country in the world by far, to include China, they are no match to what we can deliver here. And he wants to make that point to these major investors, these three countries that have obviously significant amount of sovereign wealth. And the mission here is to invest in American enterprises. Secondly, certainly they're going to discuss Iran. Certainly they're going to discuss the war in Israel. But the major effort is that.
Yeah, and you're right. You make such a great point, General, because we saw on the ground Alex Karp, the head of Palantir. We saw Mark Zuckerberg, Sam Altman from OpenAI. All the tech leaders are there. Elon Musk, obviously, is there. Not to mention your usual suspects like Larry Fink at BlackRock and a couple of others. But one of the most pivotal foreign policy achievements of President Trump's first term, of course, were the Abraham Accords, the peace agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. The president said he was this close to getting Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords. Do you think that can be achieved in this term?
Yes, I think it's absolutely possible. It's certainly how the war ends in Gaza is really an issue here. The Saudis were very close to it, and it was a primary reason for, not the primary reason, but it was one of the reasons that Hamas attacked, because they saw normalization on the horizon taking place. And that was the reality of it. And that's why Iran so strongly supported what Hamas was doing and actually expected Hezbollah to get involved in it. And they were very frustrated that Hezbollah didn't get involved to the same degree that Hamas did. So that was really one of the major reasons for that attack. I think President Trump, by getting peace in the Middle East, is the objective here, working with Prime Minister Netanyahu, And I think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia certainly recognizes that normalization is a game changer for the Arab countries in the Middle East and a game changer for his country as well.
Yeah.
To have that shared technological innovation with Israel primarily, but also what is in the back of their mind is security, Maria. By having a coalition of Arab countries united with Israel and the United States, that is a steadfast coalition and a major obstacle to Iran's aggressiveness and malign behavior in the Middle East. And that is the other reason for normalization and why it's so important.
Yeah, and we know that that is another thing that Iran is seething over. You know, Iran is in a weakened spot right now, and everything you just said is one of the reasons that you saw the Crown Prince go to the airport, greet President Trump on that purple carpet, purple indicating royalty. But I got to ask you about Gaza and Hamas and Iran. The last living American hostage in Gaza, Adon Alexander, released from Hamas captivity yesterday. These pictures are incredible, watching him reunite with his family in Israel yesterday. After being in captivity for nearly 600 days, trapped by Hamas, he's set to speak with President Trump later today. And the release is seen as a gesture to the president ahead of his Middle East trip. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, relatively quiet following the release as the president takes on more of a direct role in Middle East negotiations, General. So how do you see that relationship, Netanyahu and Trump? And what is your reaction to this last living American hostage released?
Well, I know some Israelis are disappointed that the president didn't make a trip to Israel as part of his visit to the Middle East. After all, Israel is our primary ally in the Middle East. That's indisputable. But I think what's likely behind that is not stiffen Israel in any way whatsoever. Primary reason here, he wants to focus on these three Arab countries and get their investment support. It is the reason for the visit. And he didn't want to complicate it with it. But I know Israelis are frustrated by that. I think the release of Adon Alexander is goodwill gesture on the part of Hamas to the President of the United States. They know he has a heavy hand. There is no doubt that policy changed immediately when President Trump walked into the Oval Office when it came to Israel. We released all the restrictions on weapons to them. We stopped micromanaging their operations, and through their full support behind them, we engaged in negotiations to help the Israelis to get hostages out of Gaza, and that worked, at least on a temporary basis, for some of the hostages. There's no doubt that the support the Trump administration has given Israel is considerably stronger than what they experienced in the Biden administration.
Oh, yeah.
So some Israelis are making far too much of the visit not taking place there. And I think the operation that Prime Minister Netanyahu is conducting in Gaza is done with the support of the Trump administration to finally finish off Hamas.
Yeah.
And Netanyahu believes that the pressure of that operation, which will begin after President Trump's Middle East visit is over, will possibly bring out the rest of the hostages. That's what they're hoping for. And that has worked in the past. Pressure on Hamas, release hostages. More pressure on Hamas, release more hostages. And I'm talking about military pressure, not diplomatic pressure.
And the maximum pressure campaign on Iran, of course. General, it's great to see you as always. Thanks so much for your incredible insights.
I want to talk about many different things. The great Texas Senator, Mr. Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz, welcome back to the show, sir. I want to come home here and talk about some of the developments on Capitol Hill. I think what's happening in the Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, chairman, is terrific. Virtually all the Trump tax cut proposals are going through, and I want to get to that in a minute. But I want to focus on a Ted Cruz tax cut. It used to be MAGA accounts, 401k style accounts. Some news media have you at the top of the page, and I wanted to give you a chance because you've pushed this. It's going to go into the Ways and Means, and it's going to become law. Tell us about this. Helps the new generation.
Well, it's a tremendously important proposal that I've been working on for more than a year. working with a group called Invest America that is a business coalition of CEOs and leaders across the country. And what this provision is, and as you noted, it is in the House Ways and Means reconciliation bill. The president supports it. The chairman of the Ways and Means supports it. The speaker supports it. We are going to pass it into law. What this will do is create a new personal investment account for every newborn child in America. And that personal investment account will be seeded with $1,000. And afterwards, each year, friends and family and employers can contribute up to $5,000 a year into that account.
Right.
The money is invested either in an ETF or mutual fund that's invested in the S&P 500. So it's a broad-based investment in the equity markets. And it does two things that are incredibly powerful. One, it creates a whole generation of kids that are enjoying the incredible benefits of compounded growth. And that is transformational. But number two, it creates a new generation of capitalists as children will be invested in the market. They will have a stake in the marketplace. And the House included it. The president enthusiastically supported it. And I think this is a new provision that will change how our children are raised, and 30, 40, 50 years from now, we'll look back as it being one of the most impactful parts of this tax bill.
You know, I love this. By the way, I don't know if you know this. Harold Ford and I, this was probably 15 years ago, tried something very similar to this. It's like give the youngsters, give the new babies, the youngsters, give them a financial future and a financial education. In those days, it couldn't quite get through the Congress. You've driven it through, which is a great service, I think, precisely to a lot of kids who otherwise might not have a future. I think that's part of what you're doing here, and you're giving them one, which is really great stuff. Now, the rest of this bill, you know, I was talking about this in my riff, but rest of this bill, the business investment tax cuts are kind of unbelievable. I mean, they're fantastic. You know, immediate expensing for machine and equipment, okay, that's an extension. How about for factories? That's new. That's a huge thing. If you're a foreign investor or a domestic investor, Mr. Trump says he's raising $10 trillion. Whether he gets it or not, it's aspirational. But the point is, he's given them tremendous tax incentives to come to America, to reshore to America, to build in America. I'm going to venture to say, you know, with the factories, the 15%, by the way, a lot of this is going to be retroactive to the beginning of this past year. To me, this is the most powerful stuff we can see. The biggest beneficiaries when you have a business boom are always the wage earners. That's what we learned in the first tax cut, correct? You've advocated this for years. We've talked about it for years. It's a perfect fit. I mean, it's a perfect. People are coming here. We will make trade deals with many of them. People are investing here, and we're going to give them incentives. It's going to be the lowest tax rates and probably the lowest interest rates in the world. It's got boom written all over it, Senator Cruz. That's the way I'm looking at it. I may be irrationally exuberant, but I'm very exuberant about it.
Well, listen, as usual, Larry, you're exactly right. The two best levers we have if we want jobs and economic growth are tax reform and regulatory reform. On the regulatory side, we're seeing job-killing regulations being repealed every day from the Trump administration. It's the boldest deregulatory agenda we've ever seen. That's great for job creation. And on the tax side, let me commend the House. They came forward with a major step forward in as you and the Speaker and the President put it, one big, bold, beautiful bill. Yes. I think this is a very strong bill that they put on the table. And I'm also really optimistic because I think the legislative process, I look back to 2017, the first Trump tax cut. That is the best I've ever seen the legislative process work. In 2017, the House passed a really good bill. It came to the Senate. The Senate made it better, bigger, bolder, more conservative. It then went to a conference committee and got even better after that. I believe the same process will play out here. I think it's terrific what the House has moved forward with, and I think we will make it even stronger. And we need to focus on transforming people's lives. We need to be the party of jobs and economic growth, and I think this bill is a very powerful piece of that agenda.
Even the individual tax cuts have been strengthened. It's not just a plain extension now. They've grossed up the standard deduction. That's very important. And by the way, that's going to help the seniors on Social Security benefits. They've grossed up the kiddie credit. That's very important. And as it turns out, the tax-free tips and the tax-free overtime is going to be included. Those are powerful blue-collar, middle-income, personal, individual tax cuts.
Yeah, and Larry, there are four major priorities of mine that are adopted in this bill. Number one, no tax on tips. That's my bill in the Senate. That is in this bill. That'll make a difference for hardworking men and women across this country that rely on tipped income. Number two, we just talked about a minute ago, the Invest America accounts, which are going to be powerful. A child born this year that gets an investment account, gets $1,000 seeded into it, and if over the next 18 years they have $5,000 added by friends, by families, by their parents' employer, by the time they're 18 at 7% growth rates in the market, they will have $170,000 saved up. And if they leave the money in there, by the time they're 35, they will have $700,000. And we're talking every baby born in America. That is transformational.
Yes.
That is in there.
Yes.
And the other two big wins in there is the House included a version of my school choice legislation that is tax credits for contributions to scholarship granting organizations in the states. When we enact this, it will be the biggest and boldest federal school choice legislation in history. And finally, they include spectrum auctioning off electromagnetic spectrum to the private sector, which will unleash billions of investment and create hundreds of thousands of new jobs.
Listen, this guy Kudlow at NEC had the play on all that spectrum sales so we could win the race for 5G. Senator Ted Cruz, you are wonderful. Thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you, Larry.
Thanks for all these things you've put in there. We appreciate it very much.
I also want to talk about China because President Trump and his tariffs got the communist country's economy to sputter, but they would never want you to know that. The CCP has been defiant publicly, taking shots at the U.S., saying bullying will lead to self-isolation. But a new report reveals a Chinese delegation was secretly in Washington, D.C. for negotiations as early as 3 weeks ago. And this basically gets down to the heart of the matter, which is why I think the president took this fight on. It was because he understands that China is in a very fragile situation, that it's not a situation that China could mess around with too much. And I think he finally started to, bring it up to the surface and make it public. These were secret kind of conversations because he knew that American people were looking for that to know where this was going. I see you smiling.
Well, I mean, the word all along has been leverage. How much leverage does the United States have? And of course, China talked a good game, like they don't have as much leverage as everybody says they do. But what we're finding out now is, in fact, the Chinese were coming to the U.S. saying, we got to talk. We don't want anybody to know it because we don't want to let anyone know that we're in dire straits. This goes back to local consumption that you brought up earlier. But they needed to have these conversations. We were judging what was happening based on all the surface level things we were hearing in the press. But there were, and this is always true, there are things we cannot see that are happening at levels we don't have access to that you have to think of in the context of President Trump's overall plan, which is to revive American manufacturing, revive the American economy, level the playing field. And if you're thinking about it in that way, then you've got to know with China, with India, with other countries, the negotiations are happening. Deals are being made. So then we get to Geneva, we get to Switzerland, last week, and all of a sudden, my gosh, we've got 115% reduction in tariffs. Where did that come from? Well, it came from all the work that was happening beforehand that Scott Bessent was doing and others were doing. And for whatever reason, maybe because they don't like Trump, most of the press just didn't want to believe that anything was happening at that level.
Yeah, well, the Democrats have tried to use tariffs to hammer Trump's popularity down.
Yeah.
And they're losing. They're losing. The Democrats would rather spend all their time defending MS-13 or pushing guards and police away in Newark, New Jersey and stuff like that. So they're burying themselves. Meanwhile, the China thing is so interesting, though. Trump had let the cat out of the bag. Nobody really listened to him. He said we were talking. Now, he said he and she, he sort of hinted he and she were talking, which I don't think was the case. But at various bureaucratic levels around the IMF World Bank meetings, they were talking. China
said they weren't talking, and everyone believed China.
Right. I love that, by the way.
Yeah, we all believe China because we're not talking.
That's the media for us, you
Yeah.
know. Let's believe this communist country that lies, cheats, and steals. China's economy, I'll say it again, it's below the dumpster. I mean, I was looking at Ed Yardeni was running some numbers. The rate of deflation in China. I mean, every price is falling in double digits. What does that tell you? That tells you their economy is imploding. Riots throughout the country, factories being shut down, wages not being paid. I mean, that has Tiananmen Square written all over it. That suggests that Xi Jinping's time may not be long. How about that?
Well, and Jackie, I was laughing. I know last time we had Larry on, he was kind of shaking his head at me, and I was citing all the things that China's central bank was trying to do to prop up their economy because they were in such free fall. And you shake your head and you said, Taylor, that won't do anything. And I said, well, I know. But again, it showed the impact it was having on their economy, that central bank figured out they had to do something fast to flood the market with trillions of yuan because they had no other option at that point. That is sort of going back to the art of the negotiation.
And there were reports that she was on shaky ground even before all of this tariff conversation started.
You can punch down rates as much as you want. It's not going to help if you're in a major deflation. They have structural problems, AKA state-controlled socialism doesn't work. Right. Bulletin. It doesn't work. Now, I will say this, just a little context here. The U.S.-China made a tariff restart, but not a trade policy restart. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
The policy stuff is going to be very hard. I speak from experience, having gone through it for several years, and then they ignored it after that. This is a tariff reset. So that's healthy at this point.
That's why, to me, I felt like it was a de-escalation and less of a deal, as they were calling it.
Joining us now, Chad Bianco, Riverside County, California Sheriff and California gubernatorial candidate. Gavin Newsom, sheriff, has no shame that he would stand up there now and talk about eradicating homelessness when he has done everything in his power to increase the homeless population.
That's exactly right. He has spent 20 years making sure that we do have a homeless problem in this state. And when we say homeless problem, it's a homeless industrial complex. We don't have homeless on the streets. We have drug-induced psychotic people on the street that are suffering without a home because they were kicked out for one reason or another. Either their addiction, theft, crime, their emotional behavior, whatever it was, and that's what finds them on the street. They don't want homes. They don't want housing. The law enforcement experts in this state are the ones that deal with this on a daily basis. And our failure of a governor has not once contacted any law enforcement agency to find out how we should be dealing with this crisis. And the bottom line is their policies about drugs are legal in California. We supply them needles. We supply them places to do all the stuff that they're doing. This is what is causing the homeless epidemic. These people are unfortunately rotting in their skins, and he is doing absolutely nothing but funneling taxpayer money to friends and family, NGO members that have these homeless projects that just keep sucking up that $24 billion that are doing absolutely nothing.
Sheriff, what could you do with $24 billion if you were the governor?
I would actually address it for what it is, and it's a drug-induced psychosis. We absolutely must make sure that these people have the resources that they need to get out of the drugs, to get out of the lifestyle, and make sure that we get them the treatment and the help to make them productive members of society once again. They were there before. It's the drugs and the alcohol that have taken them down this road into even a psychosis point of mental illness where we need the resources going to that. We need drug rehab, we need alcohol rehab, and we need mental health care facilities in this state. We don't need homes. We don't need tiny homes. We don't need NGOs buying hotels and then just getting rich off themselves. We need help.
Sheriff, really quickly before we go, President Trump's Department of Homeland Security is investigating the state of California for providing federal benefits to illegal aliens, like Medicaid, for example. A good move?
It's a horrible move. Horrible move, and it shows that we are tone deaf of what's truly going on in California, where we have our own residents, our actual residents who live here and work here, that are having trouble making ends meet, that are going hungry, that truly may be suffering from a lack of being able to pay their rent, so they are really homeless, living in a car, and it's a bad idea.
Sheriff Chad Bianco, candidate for governor there in the great state of California, speaking a lot of sense today. Good to hear from you, Sheriff. Thank you so much.
Moments ago, the president signed an executive order that will reduce the price of prescription drugs. Watch this.
Starting today, the United States will no longer subsidize the health care of foreign countries, which is what we were doing. What's been happening is we've been subsidizing other countries throughout the world, not just in Europe, throughout the world. So for the first time in many years, we'll slash the cost of prescription drugs, and we will bring fairness to America. We're getting them down 60, 70, 80, 90%, but actually more than that if you think about it in the way mathematically.
Extraordinary stuff. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was in the room when Trump signed the order, and he joins me now. Mr. Secretary, Trump says some prices will come down almost immediately. What is the timetable for these price cuts?
Well, there's a series of escalating steps, but you know what, that will bring them down to European levels. Right now, America provides 75% of the pharmaceutical revenues in the world, and we only have 4.2% of the world's population.
Sure.
We're paying in our country, the list price for Ozempic is $1,300 per dose. In London, it's $88. And Democratic and Republican politicians have been talking about for years, we got to end these discrepancies. Nobody has had the courage to do it because of the power of the pharmaceutical lobby on Capitol Hill.
Okay.
In answer to your question, how soon will this happen? It depends on how enthusiastically the drug companies cooperate. There are a series of escalating steps that we will take if they don't cooperate. But we're we've been meeting with the pharmaceutical companies. They admit that this is something that should have ended a long time ago. And I think they're ready to figure out a way to get there. And they have advantages in this executive order, Stuart.
Okay.
Because we got rid of the PBMs, we got rid of the middlemen, and that's something that they've wanted themselves.
Dr. Mark Siegel was on the program just a few minutes ago, and he said the devil is in the details. Specifically, do these drug price cuts apply to Medicare Part D? Can you answer the question?
Yeah, they absolutely will. Oh. They'll apply to Medicare, and they'll apply in the private market as well.
There are some critics of this who say, look, these are price controls, almost neo-socialist price controls on drug prices. What's your answer to that?
My answer is it's getting rid of price controls because the European governments have told the drug companies, here is the maximum price we're going to pay. We're not going to pay any more. If you don't give us this price, you can't sell it in our country. That is the epitome of a price control. President Trump is returning the marketplace to this and saying, look, we're going to have a global marketplace. We're going to pay the same thing in one country as we're going to pay it in the other. And we're going to stop subsidizing healthcare costs in Europe. So we are subsidizing socialized medicine in Europe on the backs of U.S. patients who are going bankrupt to pay these prices. The number one cause of bankruptcy in this country now is healthcare costs.
Yep.
And we have all these Americans who, we're getting them better, but then they are bankrupt and they have no money in order to subsidize price controls in Europe. So President Trump is going to get rid of the price controls.
You said that some of your children, some of whom are Bernie Sanders supporters, were moved to tears by this announcement. It occurs to me that basically you've stolen the Democrat issue. You've just taken it away from them and you've done it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, when the Democratic Party, I grew up with the central issues. We were against NAFTA, and President Trump has now stolen that from them.
Yeah.
We were against. We were skeptical toward big ag and big pharma, and President Trump has stolen that from them. And the major fulcrum of Bernie Sanders' campaign has been, we are going to equalize drug prices in Europe and the United States. He was never able to do it because of the power of the pharmaceutical lobby. No Republican or Democrat has been able to do it, but we have a president. And I pointed this out. President Trump took $100 million from pharma. He can't be bought. And he is doing, he's doing something. He is standing up for the American people here, Stuart. And I think, even my kids who are pretty left wing see that, and they were very moved by it.
Mr. Secretary, it looks like you're having a lot of fun in your job these days. And it was a pleasure to have you on the program today. Come back soon, please. RFK Jr. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Stuart.
You got it. 12 minutes into the trading session, and boy, have we got a rally for you. The Dow's back to a 1,000-point gain. The Nasdaq is at a 3.25% gain, and the S&P 500 is up 2.5%. That's a very strong start to a Monday morning. Over the weekend, President Trump took to Truth Social to celebrate his tariffs. He called it a financial revolution. Stephen Moore joins me. Steve, I know you're not a fan of the tariffs, but would you call what we've got going now a financial revolution?
Well, it could be the start of one. What Trump has basically been saying, and you're right, I'm not a big tariff guy. I'm much more in favor of free trade and lower tariffs. But if Trump can pull this off, and the only country that could do this is the United States, because we're the hub of the world economy, is to force all these other countries to lower their tariffs. And it looks right now like he's succeeding. I mean, we got that blockbuster deal with the UK last week, and now it looks like, I don't know all the details, I don't think any of us do at this point with respect to China, but it looks like it's a dramatic reduction in tariffs on both sides of the Pacific, with respect to the U.S. reducing our tariffs and China theirs. If you get this domino effect, then you're going to see a lot more green on that screen over the next few weeks. Now, I still think there's a lot of, I don't want to rain on this parade, but I still think there's a lot of choppy waters to go with respect to the devil really being in the details of how these negotiations are going to proceed. But, oh, my God, I mean, what's the Dow up now? 3,000 points from its low point? By the way, this is pretty close to a high point, isn't it, on the Dow? We're pretty close to it.
Yeah, we're not too far away from it. Let me put it like that. But look at the gains in the Nasdaq are absolutely spectacular.
Spectacular.
Never see anything. Well,
so by the way, Stuart, you've known me a long time. I very rarely admit that I was wrong, but maybe I was wrong about this strategy, because if he's able to pull this off, to my free trade friends out there, we would end up with freer trade and less restraints on trade, both in terms of the tariffs and the non-tariff barriers to America selling our goods abroad. So this could turn out, but I don't want irrational exuberance here, because I want to make sure that we're calm about this and realize there's still a lot of work to be done on the tariff front.
Okay, Republicans are working on Trump's big, beautiful bill.
Yep.
But the Wall Street Journal says, look, the tax cuts are shrinking. See that? The incredible shrinking GOP tax cut. Mm-hmm. Are they accurate? Are we getting less of a tax cut than we were hoping for?
Well, not exactly. By the way, as you know, I was on the editorial board there for 10 years, so a lot of friends there are still working on these editorials. I think they're a little bit behind the curve on that piece ran, I think, on Saturday, but just over the weekend now you're seeing Republicans and President Trump saying we're not going to raise the highest tax rate because we were all worried about that. That would be the dumbest thing to do, because the most harmful rate is the one that has the highest rate. It has the most distortionary effects. So I'm feeling a lot better about things. I would put the odds at 85% at this point, Stuart, that we will get this deal cut. I think now we're looking at maybe 4th of July. I would have liked to have seen it done on Memorial Day. A lot of deals that still need to be cut on that, but I think it's going to be a big, beautiful bill in the end. I really do.
So what happens to the market and the economy? We've got the China trade deal. There are 24 other deals on paper ready to be signed. Suppose we get the tax cut. You've said there's an 85% chance that we get it, and we get some deregulation stuff. What happens to the market then?
Well, it's a beautiful picture. The only real question is how much of that is already priced into the market. I'd say probably a lot of it is, because I think most investors do realize this tax cut is going to happen. The trade deals, I think, are just harder to predict. I mean, my gosh, Stuart, you've been in this business a long time. Have you ever seen a market like this? I mean, up and down. Remember, it was three weeks ago. I mean, I was on the ledge ready to jump off, and now look at these numbers. So we're not out of the woods yet. I just want to remind people that there's still going to be days when, you know, Trump announces some new big tariff and then the market falls. So it's going to be chopper waters, but I feel a lot better about things today than I did a week ago.
I don't want to be guilty of irrational exuberance, which I remember very well from 25 years ago. Steve, thanks for joining us. Great day to be with us, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir.
Today, with this agreement, we come to agreement that our reciprocal tariff rate will go down to 10% on the United States side, so it goes down 115%. We enter into a 90-day pause period for negotiations, which both the Chinese and the United States are very committed to, and the Chinese on their side also go down 115% to 10%, and they remove the countermeasures that they have in place. To be very clear, other measures that the United States has put in place in the past, whether it's tariff measures from 2018 or since.
So that was U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer on the breakthrough deal with China following high-stakes talks in Switzerland over the weekend. Joining me now, Gatestone Institute Senior Fellow Gordon Chang. And Gordon, good morning to you, and a lot to get through, but I just want to ask you this. You point out that you're not so much focused on comments from the U.S. side, you're focusing on what the Chinese said. And in particular, Vice Premier He Lifeng, I think that's how you say his name, you're focused on his language. What is it that he said that's got you not so excited about this deal?
You know, we have seen the Chinese media in the last 24 hours still use very harsh terms against the United States. You know, it's like, we will not bow down to the American type thing. Whereas you have very conciliatory talk from both Treasury Secretary Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Greer. And that indicates, at least for the moment, that the Chinese regime has not changed its posture. The reason why that's important, Cheryl, is because, you know, it's not so much the tariffs that were keeping U.S. goods out of China. It was the non-tariff barriers. And I'm not so sure that we're going to see a change in those non-tariff barriers during this 90 days, which means that we are letting Chinese goods into the U.S. It's not clear that China is going to let our goods into China.
And you say, what trade deal has China ever honored? That's your open question here. And then you also say, why are we trading with the hostile regime? But, you know, we have our supply chains are intertwined, for better or for worse, with China. And there was a huge impact on the U.S. economy pretty quickly when these tariffs went into place. You had dock workers out in California. The union was very upset because they were losing jobs because those ships from China had stopped arriving.
Well, the effect on China was much greater than it was on the United States. That was for a number of reasons, because we're not a trade-dependent economy as China is. The thing that concerns me, and you mentioned it, is that Vice Premier He Lifeng, he is the same guy who negotiated the January 2020 Phase 1 trade deal, which China dishonored almost immediately. That deal was very easy for China to comply with. All they had to do was buy specified amounts of U.S. farm products and U.S. manufactured goods, and they failed to do that. So we're dealing with someone who has, I think, deceived the United States before, and we've got to be extremely concerned about their posture right now, especially because there's a lot that's going on which doesn't relate to tariffs, which could keep and certainly have kept U.S. goods out of their country.
Well, but also, too, you know, you have to remember, this isn't President Biden. You know, there was a deal negotiated under President Trump, and then under President Biden, the Chinese were never held accountable at all for not living up to their commitments to our country. So I think there's a little more to explore there. But Liz Peek's on set with me. Gordon, just got a question for you.
Good morning, Gordon. I think one thing that we're seeing, and this is not because of recent tariffs, but it is an ongoing process, is that American companies are moving manufacturing out of China. Mattel, Apple, you name it, everyone is realizing that just what you're saying, the Chinese cannot be trusted. So isn't that the more important trend underway? I agree with you. The Chinese are never going to totally live up to their commitments on trade or anything else. They cheat like crazy. But if we have pushed and if we continue to push companies out of China, isn't that a win for America?
Well, it certainly is a win for America. This was something that started during the Trump administration, the first one, and we could see it continue through the Biden years as well, because companies realized that ultimately there was going to be trade friction between the United States and China, as well as geopolitical friction. And they had better start to diversify their supply chains, which have now become sort of supply webs because there are multiple suppliers. Ultimately, that's, yeah, I agree with you, is the bigger story. But the problem you have is that when you have this conciliatory language, it sort of then convinces companies, well, maybe they can stay. And Mattel is one company that has been very pro-China and has very much said it will keep its supply chains in China. So we got to see a lot more movement before we start declaring victory.
Well, let me pick up on this breaking news on Apple because they are considering, there's a new report in the Journal out just this morning, raising iPhone prices without blaming tariffs. This new report from the Journal is quoting people familiar with the matter, saying Apple is weighing price increases for its fall iPhone lineup, and the company is determined to avoid any scenario in which it appears to attribute price increases to U.S. tariffs on goods from China. Because most Apple devices are assembled in China. In particular, these are those high-end iPhones, you know, your $1,000, you know, Max Pro, and that they're not going to diversify out of China.
Well, on May 1st, Tim Cook said that in the current quarter, that most of the U.S. production for iPhones will come from India, not China, and that iPads and other devices will be coming from Vietnam. And so this goes back to Liz Peek's point about diversification of supply chain. You know, Apple has the most difficult to move supply chain because it is so grounded in that ecosystem in China. So if Apple can move its production to India, well, then any company can. And I think we will see other companies do so as well for the reasons that Liz mentioned. It's just so important right now to be sure your supply chain is resilient, which is actually more important now than efficiency.
You know, I want to ask you about what's happening within China. And we talked about this last week with Maria, but you know, you had these protests by these workers. You had factory workers that are protesting. They're not getting paid. They're being let go. And we saw basically riots being reported out of China. You and I talked about that. But now these unemployed Gen Z Chinese are calling themselves rat people. They stay in bed. They avoid going to work. They scroll on their phones. They're protesting burnout, and they're protesting the current job market.
Yes, and this has been going on well before President Trump took his second oath of office. This has been going on since COVID, but even before that. And the reason is that there is not only the question of unemployment, there's also disillusionment and anger, and there is burnout. So you have that group in its 20s and 30s, they're just opting out of society. We now call it rat people, used to be lying flat. There are about half a dozen terms for getting out of the system. And we now have the most recent one, which is, quote unquote, retiring, which are the most privileged segment of the Chinese population, the younger guys who are well-educated, great jobs. They're now giving all of those up. They're leaving the cities, and they're going back to their hometowns and taking up farming. So, you know, that shows you the really substantial change in mentality in China. It's just disillusionment and anger.
Gordon Chang, thank you for being here on this breaking news on China and the U.S. and this tariff deal that has been signed. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Cheryl.
All right. We are going to be right back, everybody.